Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast post-game edition. We're all dry from a relatively dry Saturday afternoon in Eugene, which is always a good thing. We got some rain, which helped with the fires, helped with air quality, and then it stayed away for most of the football game between two top 10 teams at Autzen Stadium. Ducks come out of that one victorious 45-30 in impressive fashion. Sixth win of the football season for the Ducks. Sixth straight win for the Ducks. It also delivers UCLA its first loss on the year. And Oregon now is the only team in the Pac-12 without a loss in conference play, setting them in pole position for that chase for the Pac-12 championship game in Las Vegas. And about 6 or 7 weeks. Guys, there's a lot to take away here. We were on the podcast. All three of us picked a win for Oregon. Mm-hmm. I picked a cover.
Jared
had
a
cover too.
Yeah, I had Oregon winning by 7.
I had 6, and I think the line was 6.5, so I was close, but not quite.
But a 15-point win by Oregon doesn't really tell the story of how wide the margin really was, especially in the second half. Bo Nix was incredible. We had questions about where Dan Lanning stacked up against Chip Kelly as head coaches. That came away. There's a lot of ways we could go. This is going to be a choose-your-own-adventure post-game show because there's a lot to talk about and just in terms of just how impressive this win was for Oregon football.
Well, let's start with Andrew Boyle.
Might as well.
I mean, I am joking there, but also kind of like I thought, and for those listening who maybe don't know, Andrew Boyle is the kickoff specialist. They ran that onside kick there midway through the second quarter that ended up with an extra possession. Oregon goes up 2 scores. It's never closer than that, I think, for the duration of the game. I'm joking that we should start talking about Andrew Boyle, but I'm not really joking when I say I think if it's choose your own adventure between Bo Nix or Dan calling a really good game, let's start with Dan because I think we can get to Bo in a lot of different ways later. But I was really impressed with just the decisions that Dan made. I know Matt has a story up on the site kind of talking about how to a certain degree Dan kind of, I don't want to say out-chipped Chip, but kind of used a lot of the same strategic methods, the aggressiveness to kind of out-duel a really, really good college football coach in a really big game. And I thought that onside kick, which Jared and I I guess we'll talk about the circle of trust that we remained in. I mean, on Wednesday's practice, they were working on onside kicks, that exact play. Dan told us, hey, keep it in the circle of trust. Don't share it. Because, if you do, you might not have practice access anymore. And we decided,
yes, sir.
We said, yep, we will keep our lips shut. And, it worked out, and it was a big momentum swing. And I think the thing that stood out for me there was it wasn't just that moment for keeping the foot on the gas. They went for it twice on 4th down in that first third quarter drive. I think basically the only third quarter drive for Oregon because it was a long one. It was like a 7-minute bleed the entire clock off drive, and it started with 2 fourth downs in their own territory. I just thought Dan was really aggressive, and conversely, kind of un-Chip-like. Chip settled for field goals. Dan forced the issue. They scored touchdowns after a first drive where they settled for a Camden Lewis season-long field goal. The next 6 drives for Oregon all resulted in touchdowns. That's really impressive. And really, if not for a couple of kind of weird possessions to end the game, you could have looked up and said, hey, Oregon scored every time they touched the football. And so I think that's a credit. And Bo also gave credit to kind of Lanning and Dillingham and how aggressive they are and how much confidence that gives an offense of, hey, we're going to go ahead and roll the dice here. And we're going to try to put ourselves maybe in a bad situation if it doesn't work with an onside. Well, it works and you score a touchdown. Hey, we're going to go for it on 4th down. If it doesn't work, it's a really short field for a really good offense who, frankly, we haven't really stopped either. And it works. And they went back to it. So I think, we had that kind of comments of, who's going to win the chess match from a coaching perspective. And I think I would say pretty decisively Oregon's coach was better in a lot of these big moments.
Oh, 100%. Dan was the better coach today. And I think a lot of that goes into he was just more aggressive overall. I don't think Chip Kelly had a bad coached game or anything like that because their offense moved the ball in Oregon, and we'll get to that later. But there were a couple of moments where Chip Kelly went for fourth downs. There was one that was inside of his own territory, like a 4th and 6. They
First
went
drive
for
of
it.
the
It just
third quarter.
Yep. Yeah. When they needed a score because Oregon had just scored out of going into halftime, this was just an opportunity where it seemed like Chip should have gone for it more often on fourth down. And, they finished 2 for 2. Obviously, the issue with fourth down is if you don't get it, and then Oregon gets the ball, and UCLA's defense could not stop Oregon, which brings me to why not? Let's the Bo Nix. Good. That should have been Matt's article title tonight. That could be the podcast title tonight is Bo Nix. Good. Bo Nix he was outstanding tonight. The game plan by Kenny Dillingham was great. He had over 50 yards on the ground, 51, 283 through the air, 5 touchdowns. He's one of 4 quarterbacks now in the FBS to have multiple games this season with 5 touchdowns or more passing. He didn't have any of those in his career prior to coming to Oregon. Now he has 2 this season. He's been just great these last couple of weeks. And again, you take that Georgia game out of what his statistics are, it's just night and day. He's just an elite quarterback, like Dan Lanning mentioned at the end of the game. And he played like one tonight. There wasn't a throw there that he couldn't make. He had that bomb to Troy Franklin for 49 yards. I know a lot of the naysayers will talk about how Bo doesn't really throw the ball down the field. It's a lot of behind the lines things and letting Bucky or whoever's catching the screen. But that's not a disservice to Bo. That's not a disservice at all. That just makes life easier for the offense. And Kenny Dillingham just had just a tremendous game today. I thought he was awesome. I thought Dan letting Kenny work, just like, hey, yeah, you want to go for it on 4th and short? We'll just run a quarterback sneak, all that stuff. Just offensively, just so superior. This was a great game, and I like Erik was mentioning, it felt like Oregon outshipped Chip back at home in Oregon. Very, very impressive game overall.
On the preview podcast, we talked a lot about for the pick podcast on Friday. We talked about the conservativeness of past Oregon games against UCLA in the second half that opened the door for the Bruins either to get the lead or to get really close to winning the game. And that was not on display today against UCLA. 4th down and 4 at the UCLA 37 with, I don't know, I think it was like 11 minutes to go in the game. Oregon is leading this game by like 15 points. And the previous staff probably would have taken a 5-yard penalty and punted the football. And Oregon elected to go for it on 4th and 4. And Bo Nix threw what I thought was maybe the best ball he threw all day. That back shoulder dart to Bucky Irving, who ran a wheel route out of the backfield for a touchdown, 37 yards. And it was a play that it wasn't the same play design, but a very similar throw that he made at Washington State that was pick 6, like the angle and the trajectory of that ball. Yeah. And it was right on the money. And I thought UCLA had a sliver of a chance to maybe come back and get that into overtime. And that play, the decision to go for it, the play by Bo Nix, and then the route by Bucky, just nail in the coffin, dead. UCLA was dead to rights after that play. But Dan Lanning's just, I love it. Bo Nix said it post game, absolutely loves having the head coach be willing to gamble like he has. Obviously, it's not, you can't rely on it being this consistent every single time. But Lanning's decisions to be this aggressive really hasn't backfired yet. Feels very much like Staley for the Chargers last year, when they would always go for it on 4th down and never really backfired until the very end of the season. But it hasn't burned Oregon yet. And I think for the first time in a long time, I walked away from this game thinking, okay, Oregon has a superior coaching staff that at least in the conference, you're not walking in going, boy, what happens if this gets into a chess match and adjustments are being made, and how do you adjust to the adjustment? And Oregon's staff has done a really good job. The game plan was perfect, and I was really impressed with this staff because they were, air quotes, labeled just recruiters by a lot of other teams within the conference, and I think they're showing that they're more than just that by far.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. You wonder, a lot of big time 24 recruits on campus for this in 2023s. You kind of wonder what the recruiting payout will be. We'll see in the next 24, 48 hours a week maybe, but I have to imagine this is a pretty attractive, especially as an offensive player, system to work in. And if you're a defensive player, you might say, hey, okay, the defense maybe isn't clicking on all cylinders, as you might put it, but it's a defensive-minded coach. There's a lot of talent here. This is a team that is clearly going to be contending for conference championships, and with the right quarterback in play like the one they have now, maybe more than that. And I just, back to the Bo Nix of it all, because I didn't really get a chat about it too much yet on this podcast. I think his now 6-game run is, and I'd have to run through numbers here. Statistically, this has to be one of the most impressive 6-game runs an Oregon quarterback has had since Marcus. I mean, I don't know how many times Justin Herbert had a run like this. I mean, you think about it, 17 touchdowns, 1 interception, 8 rushing touchdowns. That's what he's done in 6 weeks. That's 25 combined touchdowns, 1 turnover. I don't think Justin Herbert had a run like that. And I'm not saying because he's a lesser player. Part of it is what we were also just talking about, which is you now have an offense and a head coach that are much more aggressive in every facet. Jared, you made a comment about some of what he does being kind of underneath. There's a fair amount of that screens and stuff underneath, but they take some shots, man.
That's right, exactly. And
they
every
take some
offense
shots.
nowadays is screens underneath. That's how it is.
He set it up, and the play action ball he had to Troy Franklin was one of the better deep balls I've seen in a long time from an Oregon quarterback. 50 yards, right on the money.
Perfect. Yep.
Ball hung in the air felt like too long. It's one of those where the ball is in the air for so long, and you're thinking,
this is an overthrow.
Yeah, or is it going to hang up there too long and the DB's going to catch up? But it hit Franklin right in stride in the end zone. It's a great throw. And there's a couple of throws that I'm excited to go back and rewatch and just check out, because in the moment they felt just about perfect. So he is playing at such a high level right now, and what a cool opportunity for him. Matt and I were talking about this, kind of joking about. He's probably getting tired of hearing, "Why were you so bad at Auburn? Why are you so good now?" Because that's sort of the question after every one of these games. Because I think as a and some of it's coming from national media who haven't been around, and maybe this is the first time talking to him since Georgia, et cetera. But I just think most people had preconceived notions about, and I know we did, about what he would be, and he has so far surpassed even to me the best case. Like I thought best case was, game manager that will maybe lose you some games by trying to do too much, and will certainly keep you in games, and maybe he'll make a couple of great plays here or there. I mean, he's been next to flawless now for like a month and a half.
Yeah,
and
ever since Georgia.
It's really something to watch. And you get a sense of like, hey, Oregon you look at their schedule, they can, if he keeps playing like this, and we haven't talked too much about Kenny Dillingham, but we should. If everything kind of keeps clicking like it has, like there's not a team they can't beat on the schedule. In fact, they're going to be favored every game. And the Utah game will be tough. I think the game at Corvallis will be tough. Washington probably will at least bring an A game that can be competitive for a while. But this is a team that really, you start looking up and thinking, conference championship game early December, they win that game, they get hot here. Who knows what the national discussion will be around Oregon as a potential one-loss team in the big picture stuff. I don't even know if we want to get into that, but they're going to open the door for some of those conversations to at least be had because of how well they're playing right now.
100%. You go ahead, man.
Erik, you brought up the maybe the best run since Marcus. I pulled up Marcus's first 7 games of his Heisman season in 2014. Bo Nix has a better completion percentage than Marcus. Marcus was at 70.2. Nix is at 71.5. Bo Nix has thrown 17 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Marcus threw 19 touchdowns. He had not thrown an interception up until that point in the season.
Pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty good.
Not bad.
Marcus Mariota had 5 rushing touchdowns, 289 yards rushing, 5.2 yards per carry. Some of that's inflated because of sacks. I don't know how many were involved in that.
Right.
But Bo Nix, who has 1 sack on the year, has 382 yards rushing, 8 total touchdowns, and he's averaging 8 yards per carry. He has fewer rushing attempts than Marcus Mariota does by 8.
Yeah.
So the numbers are very, very, very similar. Both quarterbacks were 6-1 up until this point. And unlike Marcus, unlike Bo, I don't think Marcus has 2 top 15 wins at the time. UCLA may have been ranked in the top 15 when Oregon went down there, and it was like a win or you're out of the playoff discussion. It was Hundley versus him. Oregon won that one 27-17. But Bo's got 2 top 15 wins, BYU and now UCLA, and he's looked really, really good in both of them.
Yeah. I got one more stat for you, in case you want that. This is from Adam Rittenberg for ESPN. He says, Bo Nix is the first quarterback in the past 2 seasons to have a quarter that had a perfect completion percentage, 11 of 11, and 3 or more passing touchdowns. So he's just balling out. And like Matt said, comparing him to Mariota's Heisman statistics, he's on par for those type of finishing numbers. He's not the runner that Marcus is, but he's really efficient when he does get his opportunities to run. Another 50 yards on the ground today. And again, those are, Matt, I think you asked the question of, how does Nix turn a potential negative play into a positive? And he really encapsulates that with what he does with his legs. It's like the pocket is collapsing, and instead of taking a sack, he gets 5 to 7 yards, and that's better than losing 5 to 7 yards. I think I'd like to take a detour and talk Kenny Dillingham for a minute, because we haven't been able to talk to him in forever. Yes, Erik.
I just wanted to follow up on Matt's point. UCLA in 2014 was 18th, so you'd be correct on your assessment of 2 top 15 wins. And I think we should go ahead and talk Kenny, Jared, because it's deserving.
Yeah, man. I mean, it is just tremendous to watch this offense go to work. I think most of us who have watched Oregon as passionately, whether you're a fan or a reporter in our shoes, to see an offense do these types of things is probably like, I don't know, like a mirage of like seeing water in the desert and just seeing these things. And you're like, holy cow, this can actually happen on a football field. Oregon did a tremendous job setting up bubble screens in the first part of the game before hitting Terrence Ferguson with that old Jacob Breland, Marcus Arroyo throw. That was beautiful. Do we want to just jump into the third quarter drive? Like, should we just go right into that now?
That was special.
That was so fun. That was very reminiscent, Jared, of the BYU end of that first half.
Yes. It was basically the same circumstance where Oregon just wants to chew as much clock as possible. And they go for it on a 4th down and short in their own territory. And when they did that against BYU, you're like, what the hell is Dan Lanning thinking? This is like their own 35-yard line. And you're like, what are they thinking? And then you just watch it in this 14J package. And today it was a 15 play, 88-yard drive. I want to say it was 13 of them, 82, excuse me. 13 of them were passing or were rushing plays. 2 of them were passing. The final play was a 17-yard touchdown pass to Cam McCormick. Just great designs especially on that final one with the fake pitch outside to whoever the running back was to go back inside to Cam McCormick in the end zone. It's just beautiful to watch. And you saw Kenny Dillingham's, I don't know if you guys saw it, but on Twitter, someone posted a video of from the broadcast of Kenny Dillingham just going nuts and then the coordinator booth about how his offense was performing. And he deserves it. He's been the lights out this year. Like, I think he's only had a couple missteps, like in the red zone against Washington State. You could talk against Georgia, but he's been on fire, and he was just unbelievable today as well.
A couple kind of newish wrinkles that stood out to me was, you talk about one on that third quarter drive where it's run. Literally, I would have to say the word run 12 times in a row to fully encapsulate it, because it was 12 straight runs. And then out of that 14J package, I've been wondering when they were going to do this, but they actually threw it to the fullback, who's Patrick Herbert, for an 11-yard gain, and he was completely uncovered down the sideline, as UCLA, I'm sure, had done the scout and said, they've never thrown it out here. They're not going to do that. And I'm sure they're aware of that possibility. But to this point, I guess the kind of the game tape on it was they hadn't done it yet. That was the first time they'd thrown out there, and they've
only thrown once out of the 14J before today, right?
Well, they threw the touchdown to Cam McCormick in the end zone, and I don't know if I can't think of another one. Those are the two I could think of. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I really liked was, I think it was in the fourth quarter, was they go 2 running backs, and they're basically using one as a fullback, where they have Sean Dollars and Noah Whittington next to each other, and the player to the right gets the ball and runs kind of like a counter or a sweep to the left, off the left side, and the other player, in this case it was Whittington, just basically takes out the UCLA linebacker and opens up about a 20-yard run for Dollars. I mean, there's just these kind of small, subtle, creative nuances, and I'm sure there's a lot more there that we'll pick up when we watch the game again. But these are just things I noticed from the press box. And you're right on the Cam McCormick touchdown. You caught it on the broadcast. I saw it on the replay of that pitch to kind of get the defense moving outside. You lose your leverage. You throw to the middle of the field. He's wide open there. Just these little subtle things that are really, really working. And Nix was asked kind of about this relationship with Dillingham, and he said they're kind of almost like reading each other's minds at this point. There's a level of trust, a level of confidence, and kind of how everything is working there. I think it sounds like Dillingham gives Nix a lot of kind of freedom to kind of make checks and make changes at the line of scrimmage and kind of call. And there's just a level of confidence between the two of them that I think really stands out watching it, live. But even more so, I think when we go back and watch it, we'll kind of see some of the nuance of, hey, maybe they were going to do this or that, but Bo was able to kind of coordinate, hey, let's do this instead. And that's, again, one of the advantages of not only having a quarterback who's really playing at a high level, but having an experienced one who has a little experience with that coordinator. And you can just tell it's a really, really healthy marriage right now between quarterback and offensive coordinator. I
had one more play that I thought was just beautiful to watch, at least from the press box, where it's basically like all 22s. You can see everything. It was the play where Chase Cota got tackled in the end zone before they scored on, I think it was the 4th down and goal to Troy Franklin for a second touchdown. They ran 2 guys all the way across to one side of the field, and then Chase Cota ran all the way to the other side of the field. And Bo Nix rolled out, set himself up, and didn't throw across his body, but threw across the field. And it was just a great throw. It was a great play design. Chase Cota had his guy beat for an easy touchdown. UCLA very smartly just tackles Chase Cota and doesn't allow him to even come close to making a play on the ball. But Kenny Dillingham has done plays like that before. Against Washington State, he had a really interesting one where
they did that same kind of thing twice against Washington State. Very similar.
Yeah, and one of them, Troy Franklin and Chase Cota, I think were the 2 guys to do this. They ran like a foot away from each other the entire time that they crossed the field. And then Troy Franklin jetted up, and then Chase Cota jetted down. And because they were so close, both guys were right there, and they didn't know who they had for the defense. And then both followed Troy Franklin, and Chase Cota was what Kenny Dillingham does at this age and this quote unquote little experience of being a play caller is tremendous. And Oregon is quite lucky that he's best friends with Dan Lanning.
First year play caller. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be around here for long. And that's no inside information or anything like that.
How dare you?
He's too good. And
put him on mute.
Sorry.
Well, I think Canzano tweeted it best. Like UCLA's their best way to stop Oregon was have ASU sign Dillingham as their head coach at halftime. Like Jared's right. I enjoy Dillingham while he's in Eugene. It's a matter of when, not if, he becomes a head coach somewhere. He's going to have a plethora of options this offseason. We'll see if he makes the move or not. But real quick, before we take a break, I'm going to pose this question to you guys. offensively in the conference. USC didn't play today, so maybe that factors in here a little bit. But I think Oregon's offense is the most balanced and probably the best offense in the league. This was UCLA's offense was one of them. Oregon went toe for toe and basically obviously outscored them because they won the game, but played at a rate where UCLA just couldn't sustain it. And I just wonder, is this the best offense in the conference? And I don't know if we're necessarily – I didn't think we'd have this discussion, even if they are the best team. I don't think we'd even get to that point of even considering it.
Yeah, after a night like tonight, it feels like the right thing to say. As we said, 545 yards, 283 through the air, 262 on the ground. Balance is the right way of putting it. They keep hitting this 200-plus yard total. I think Jared and I both predicted that one on our predictions pod. Bucky Irving, over 100 yards. Devastated. Yeah. The least excited I've ever been for a player to run for 100 yards. Those who watch this podcast know why. I predicted it all season, and then I move away from it. Matt predicts it, and he gets it. And Matt, you were sweating it though because he did. It was the same thing. It was like the last drive of the fourth quarter.
It's unbelievable.
And he had 95 yards. Oh my gosh!
It wasn't done until we went down on the field, peeling the onion back. We get to go down on the field for the last 5 minutes of the game. Shout out to whoever that dude was that yelled at us in the stands. Duck territory, guys, love you. That was very good. That was very
Don't
cool.
know who he is, but shout out to you, man. I appreciate it.
Whoever you are. And then like the very next play, I think, or a couple plays later, you guys were a little bit further down the field than I was. Bucky Irving got the yards. I turned around. Jared saw me. I went like this and celebrated. Erik was in disgust.
I saw you too. I just was in a little bit different.
He just wasn't going to show.
I'm obviously joking around. He had a great game. It was fun to watch him play. So it's so funny because several people on Twitter, I tweeted about how he got his first 100-yard game, and I think a lot of people saw what I was getting at there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If I'm not going to predict it, I'm not going to. And I've diverted this into something else, Matt, but. I just to your original point, I think it's fair to have that conversation. I'll be curious to see, really what this offense does the rest of the way, and kind of what milestones it continues. I mean, this is again, we haven't really said it. This is another over 40-point game. That's every game since the Georgia game. They scored no touchdowns against Georgia, and they've scored more than 40 points every game since. They've hit 500 yards, I think, in 5 out of the 6 games. I mean, it's just been super impressive. And I think it's hard to argue it's not. I think UCLA and USC, and maybe you include Utah and Washington kind of in the conversation just because they've had good production this year. I think this offense is pretty special. And in the head-to-head now against UCLA, I don't think there was any question which offense was better. And we haven't even noted, UCLA didn't punt the entire game.
Yeah.
We had one punt.
It was a blowout.
And we had one punt the whole game, and it was Oregon at the very, very end of the game. And so – UCLA's offense was not really turned away all day. They had 1 turnover. They settled for field goals. Oregon scored touchdowns. That was the difference, and I think that sort of proves the point we're getting at.
Yeah. For the Pac-12's best offense, there's a lot of good options. I think there's a clear top 3. I think it's Oregon, Utah, and USC. I think Caleb Williams is the best quarterback in the conference, but when you watch USC games – because he's so talented, it looks like this is part of the offense, but he's on the run a lot. That offensive line does not hold up that well. And I know it was against Utah last week, and they have a pretty good defensive front, not as good as it has been in years past, but he's on the run a lot. And he's really talented, and he's going to be a high draft pick, and I love watching him play and all those good things. But that could potentially come back to bite them at one point. And they have all the weapons, and they're going to be a run and gun. They're going to If Oregon and USC play, it's going to be like 52-45. Someone's going to win that game. But like Matt said and Erik touched on, it's extremely balanced, this team. And, they have 283 yards passing, 262 yards rushing. They have 1 million yards on the ground against Arizona. They have 1 million yards on the ground against Stanford, but in Washington State, or it's not Washington. Oh yeah, Washington State. Bo Nix goes nuts because they have to throw the ball. They're capable of doing whatever with this offense. I have a question to now ask you guys. hear me out. We've heard a lot about, Oregon and their loss to Georgia and how humiliating it was, 49-3, blah, blah, blah. How impressive is it that Georgia held this Oregon offense to 0 points?
3 points, Jared.
3 points, excuse me. Sorry,
Come on.
yes.
Come on.
0 touchdowns, excuse me, 0 touchdowns.
Be fair.
3 points total. How impressive is that?
By the way, this is going to be
Georgia's really good.
Yeah. I was just going to say, this is a long diversion before that break Matt talked about a half hour ago. That we're taking.
6 minutes ago. So I think we can probably take that break.
Do you want to take the break and have the answer on those sides? Should we do a radio tease?
Yeah,
Sure.
I could do my best
tease.
Greeny impression. Yeah.
Send it to break, Jared. Why don't you send it to break?
How impressive was Georgia's win over Oregon? Only allowing 3 points. Come back after the break and we'll let you know.
Bring us back.
Welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. I was expecting Matt to do it.
Well, you sent it to break. I don't know how.
I don't know. I sent it to break, but
We got there.
We got
yeah.
that.
So Matt, how impressive is it now? We can jump on to something else now.
Well, I mean, to answer the question, go ahead. Sorry, Matt.
To answer the question, I mean, I'd like to have seen maybe, if we're living in a hypothetical world, I'd love to see Oregon play Georgia now. I still think they lose. I still think they lose by more than 2 scores, but it's nowhere near as bad as it looked. But at the time, yeah, Georgia's an NFL team, and they basically destroyed Oregon. And I think you look at that and say that, when they play an elite team, Georgia's defense rises up and shows you their true potential. Is there going to be? I don't think Oregon's going to come close to not even scoring 24 points in a game the rest of the way, and to only hold them to 3 is probably going to be the reason why Oregon doesn't make the playoff if they run the table and they go 12-1. That's the only reason why they don't get in that scenario in my eyes, because they scored 3 points against Georgia, which is damn impressive.
I think what it speaks to, though, is the difference between those top teams. And I say that knowing Oregon a year ago beat one of those top teams in Ohio State at their place, right? And was proved they were competitive, which is what makes this thing from Georgia so much more impressive. I think it's kind of a perfect storm of a lot of things not going Oregon's way in terms of, I'm not saying that they had the ball not bounce their way, but you've got a new head coach, you got this offensive coordinator had never called plays before in a game, defensive coordinator going against a defense or an offense that was very much in rhythm, didn't have the ability to really, come up with counters is what Dan has said, didn't really have the ability to kind of punch back in ways that they should have. And you just kind of saw all that come together, and it was just a lousy game. And I think just to say it's really impressive what they've done since. I think we've kind of communicated that about the offense, but just in general, the run they're on right now. And I'm with you, Matt. It would be, I don't even want to really get into the college playoff discussion too much, but it'll be very interesting to see how if hypothetically Oregon does run the table here, I guess knock on wood, because that's, maybe it's bad luck to talk about like a no-hitter, or a perfect game, but would be very interesting to see how they weigh that game. Oregon lays a total stinker and gets absolutely diced up. And if you're going to compare that Oregon team with whoever else is kind of on the bubble there, it's going to be a huge black mark to have to kind of think through. And again, I don't even think we should get into this because I think there's too much season to be played, too many tough games left. But it will be, hypothetically, if it gets there, a really interesting dilemma, I think, for the committee to go through and say, hey, well, look at Oregon, look at these 12 straight wins. They're really impressed, but man, they just got absolutely embarrassed in the first game. Do you benefit them or do you give them credit for all the run they had after? But how much does that loss? Because I know Reese Davis, I believe I saw Zach
yesterday
quote about that. Reese Davis, who is hosting College Game Day, was in town and basically said, I don't think Oregon's deserving because of that loss. You can't lose a game like that and get in. So, I don't know. What else do we have to talk about in this pod, Matt?
Defense. I mean,
let's do that.
Defense for sure.
I mean, as Erik said, that there was no punt by UCLA. Now, I think this was the type of game, and then very similar to the Chip Kelly days at Oregon, where if you kicked a field goal against Oregon's offense, you were essentially punting because you were not going to be able to stop the offense until they pulled their first string off the football field. So they had a couple third down stops that forced field goals. UCLA scored just 3 points in the third. Oregon allowed UCLA just 3 points in the first half and the first quarter as well. And then there was that garbage touchdown late in the fourth. Overall, though, we were talking about this, about their big three post-game as we were walking to our cars. Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback, Zach Charbonnet at running back, and then Bobo at receiver. All three guys put up, when you look at the stats alone, you didn't watch the game, you would say, oh, well, all three guys played good. Robinson threw for 262. He had 2 touchdowns. He had 38 yards on the ground. He did throw a pick, but he completed almost 70% of his passes. Charbonnet went for 151 and a touchdown, averaged 7 yards a carry. And then Bobo had a touchdown, 101 yards receiving. But none of them really made, like, I guess Charbonnet made a couple big moves on the ground.
Yeah.
But
he was really
but none of them were like earth-shattering, game-changing momentum plays. And Oregon just kept everything in front of them. And yeah, Charbonnet had a 33-yard run, but he didn't score, I don't think, on that run. And I was just pretty impressed with, Oregon didn't technically stop them, but they really limited the big play explosion plays, which was something Lanning had talked about all week, being, the difference in this game.
I think it's notable, and you have to give credit for forcing field goals. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but in a game where, as Matt, you made the point, Matt, I think after Oregon's first field goal, maybe it was UCLA's, of like, kind of feels like a game where you don't want to be settling for field goals. And that ends up being the difference. I mean, straight up it did. I mean, Oregon scores touchdowns basically every drive after their first, and UCLA's kicking field goals half the time. And that ends up being the difference, really, in this game, aside from the stolen possession they had off the onside kick. But no, I think a lot of credit there. 6 of 12 UCLA was on third down. Not incredible, but UCLA was fourth in the country in third down conversion. Oregon, like, almost last. This is still not a great rate. This is about what they've been averaging this season, about 50%. So it's not like an incredible showing, but being able to get off the field at times is important against a team like this. And as you said, Matt, like, if you were a college football fantasy manager and you had any of those 3-star players for UCLA, you'd come away going like, that was pretty good. Like Charbonnet, big stats. Bobo had some big plays.
Yeah.
DTR limited the mistakes and made some big plays, had decent numbers throwing, decent numbers on the ground. But I think it was pretty clear which offense was better. And UCLA has a ton of talent on this offense, has obviously a really, really high-end coordinator, play caller, game planner, whatever, however you want to term it, with Chip. And I think this is a great barometer for kind of where you're at. And Oregon passed the test, there's no doubt, offensively. And defensively, they did enough. It wasn't great. It wasn't perfect. Would like to see a little bit more getting after the quarterback. DTR wasn't sacked the whole game. I don't know how many times he was even really pressured, or
I don't know if it has that.
One quarterback hit by Noah Sewell in this entire game. Neither quarterback.
There was ample opportunities for sacks, but he that's where he showcased his ability to get away from.
Who was going to take him down?
Yeah, right. He's
Kyler Murray
super hard. He's super hard to bring down. So
he slipped away.
Like, the defense is clearly not as good as the offense right now. I think everybody understands that. Everybody agrees with that. I thought the defense played adequately. As Matt said, you kept everything in front of you. You held them out of the end zone. There weren't a lot of explosives. Was it perfect? No. But on a day like this, you didn't need to be perfect defensively. If the offense is going to score like it did, obviously, if this was a game where the offense was struggling a little bit, they might lose. You give up 30 points. You don't feel great about it. It's a pretty hefty amount of points. But to be frank, like, this game wasn't really that competitive from like a suspense perspective in the fourth quarter. And I think it was pretty obvious after Oregon had its 7-minute, 15-play drive there in the third quarter that this game was basically over, barring some miraculous things happening. And what the Oregon defense didn't allow to happen was allow like an 80-yard touchdown, You know what I mean? Like a bunch of explosive plays that changed the game. Oregon's defense forced them to go the length of the field all game and either settle for field goals or score a couple of touchdowns. I guess 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think describing the defense as adequate is the perfect way to do it. They did their job when they needed to. They allowed some touchdowns, which happens. But coming into this game, UCLA's offense is really damn good. And again, they're a good offense. They average over 500 yards a game. They average nearly 300 yards passing and over 200 running. Like, they're also very balanced. They average over 41 points. They're third in the conference at 41.5 points a game. They held them up to 11 points under their average. I think they finished at 420 something for their total game. So 80 yards under their season average. Oregon's defense was fine, and they held them to field goals. They made Siri. They yelled. Apparently, I triggered Siri. Apologies.
Siri, what was the score of the Oregon UCLA game? Siri?
She can't hear you.
Oh, your headphones. Right.
I'm sorry.
I thought I was going to game the system.
Yeah,
sorry.
You're gonna do me dirty. Adequate is the perfect way to describe it. But like Matt and Erik, like you guys just went through, they limited the big plays, and the stat broadcast system that we use for all of our stats takes track of big plays. They consider a big play for a passing of 15 or more yards and a big play of running for over 10 yards. UCLA finished with 9 total big plays, 196 total yards from those big plays. Oregon finished with 19. They had 10 more big plays for 347 yards. Wow. So they had 10 more big plays and they had 150 more yards this game because of those big plays. And that was, we talked about this while walking to our cars. The big plays for UCLA on offense through passing were the 36-yard touchdown where Justin Flo just couldn't catch up to the running back out of the backfield. Not a great spot for him to be in, especially when he's kind of going through injuries as he has been this year. And the other was the Jake Bobo, the tremendous one-handed grab over the middle of the field that went for 28 yards. That's it. They had big plays according to stat broadcast, but nothing was over 20 yards. I think the other one was 19 yards. Oregon had a bunch. They had multiple big plays, especially the 49-yarder, the 51-yarder. I don't remember what it is in the stat sheet. To Troy Franklin over the top for a touchdown. I think that's the main difference. Dan preached it this week about how good UCLA was in big plays, how they were third or second in the conference behind Washington. Dorian Thompson-Robinson was fine. He could have nearly had 3 or 4 interceptions tonight. He had the one to Brian Addison in the back of the end zone. Oregon just did a good job of saying, if you want 6 to 7 yards at a time, be our guest. That'll keep you out of the end zone. That'll keep us at least in a striking distance for our offense. I thought they played adequate. I thought there were moments where they played pretty good. I thought the pass rush got there every once in a while, but it was going to be really hard to bring down DTR no matter what. Yeah, adequate. That's the best way to describe it, and that's all they needed.
I think we can maybe wrap it up with this talking point. Oregon now goes on the road for 2 weeks. They're 6-1 on the season. Next week they go to Cal. That's a game where Cal is starting to crumble here a little bit. We'll see what happens as of this recording. They just started their night game against Washington. Oregon should win that game next week. It should be a convincing win. The following week, they go to Colorado. It's the mountains. It's going to be early November. Maybe some kooky things happen, but Colorado is legitimately maybe the worst team in college football. They should win that game going away. Today, we saw LSU go on, get a big upset against Ole Miss. Next week, there's a couple games that are playing out that could involve a couple teams ranked ahead of Oregon fall. In 2 weeks, same case. I think we're going to go in. This is a big moment for Oregon the next 2 weeks here. If they look good, and winning by 15 against Cal probably is not going to be a good indicator of where this team is surging. But if they can get some blowout victories, we're going to go into the last 3 weeks of the season, the last 3 weeks of November, with a legitimate discussion of what Erik was trying to avoid, the college football playoff. This is, I think the question now from Oregon is, If they're that team where we want to have that conversation, if they're a playoff team, should they be in discussion? These next 2 weeks are against opponents where they should just blast the doors off them and look good doing it. And I don't know if I'd say I would be concerned if they beat Cal 28-14, but you can't have those types of discussions that people are going to want to have with the playoffs in play by looking mediocre against below average competition.
There's really only been one game since Georgia where they've not put the foot down and just blasted somebody, and that was the game in Pullman.
Yep.
These two games are on the road. They were much better in their second true road game in Tucson a couple weeks ago. That was a really impressive game. I think you're right in terms of, obviously, for showing off for the committee, it's important to take care of business. I think for just getting to a point where you reach those back 3 games and have a chance to make a big run, you have to be making improvements during these 2 weeks too, right? And I think that's the thing that, like, we talked about in the Midpoint podcast about, like, kind of what has impressed me the most from Coach Lanning and the staff, and it's just the kind of the progression to improve from week to week and kind of identifying things that aren't your best and then working on it and then seeing, actual improvement the next game. And I think it's imperative. I'm expecting it, but I think it's imperative you still see, even against lesser opponents that you could, quote unquote, overlook, to continue to see them making strides, because they are going to get to these games in November against better competition than what they've got the next couple of weeks where they have to up their game. I think if they play like this, they're going to be hard pressed to lose to anyone on their schedule, right? Today, if they play like this offensively. But the defense needs to get better, and there are obviously areas offensively that you want to see progress as well. It's hard to point to them right now after this game because they were damn near, perfect at times, most of the game, really. But I think that, to me, is the thing I'm going to be focusing on is, hey, not that you're ignoring results, not that the results don't matter. I just think everybody's going to expect these games to be pretty lopsided. I think they will be, most likely. But it's about making sure you're kind of continuing with that kind of upward trajectory progression of improving, because they're going to need to be playing their best football when they get to November if they really want to have a chance of playing for something special this year.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think these next 2 games will be blowouts. It's really nice that of the final remaining games, the 2 road games are against Cal and Colorado, two of the worst teams in the Pac-12. And like Matt mentioned, Colorado is one of the worst teams in college football. Mind you, Colorado did beat Cal, so there's something going on there. But it's we talked about this a long time ago about how favorable the schedule was for Oregon if they were in this scenario. And now they're here. They are here in this scenario, and they don't have to go on the road to Washington. They don't have to go on the road to Utah. I fully expect these games to be blowouts just because Cal and Colorado just cannot hold anything to this Oregon offense. It's just going to be 40 points probably regardless of what happens. At this point, you're looking for defensive improvements, and these 2 games should be opportunities for Oregon's defense to improve. They should be opportunities for Oregon's defense to make adjustments and gain some confidence, because they have to go against Washington and Utah in the 2 weeks after that, and then Oregon State, like we've gone through. And Washington and Utah are no slouches offensively. Washington led the conference before today with 42 points a night, and Utah is sitting there at 40.7. They just put up 45 against USC, whose defense has been pretty good this year, but haven't really played anybody. But I digress. Those are 2 good offenses. This is going to be another situation where an adequate defense might be good enough if you go against Washington, or it might not be. And the things that Washington does well are, once again, things that Oregon doesn't do well on paper with. Utah is a team that is a little more run heavy, but we've seen the last couple of years that Cameron Rising is a very good quarterback in the Pac-12 and is capable of making throws and is capable of using his legs. These are not easy matchups for Oregon's defense, and the improvement that this defense has shown throughout the year is nice. But these next 2 weeks of practice and game reps, they need to improve at some point, because it doesn't get any easier for them as a defense. The only part that is easy quote unquote is the fact that these games against these big time opponents are at home. And you saw the Autzen energy tonight. I don't think we've touched on this topic yet, but it was electric. The Stomp Out Cancer jerseys were very nice looking. I liked them a lot. The student section that had been going all day from game day showed up with a lot of energy. It was
all pink too, by the way.
All pink. Very nice. Good job, student section, for staying for most of the game. Very proud of you. I think this is the best Autzen has been in some years. This one felt different. I think the attendance was 59,962, which was the 4th highest in Autzen Stadium history. So, again, great environment, and that is on Oregon's side when they have to play Washington, Utah. That really helps them.
Real quick, Javon Holland tweeted, "Game management handshake Dan Lanning."
Oh,
even the former players are enjoying the coaching by Dan Lanning's crew. Shout out to ESPN for using our audio on the game day show today. That was pretty cool to see. Shout out to that guy that saw us again at the stands. That was cool.
Random guy listening to this podcast, if you're such a big fan, let us know who you are so we can be like, this is the guy who was yelling at us from the stands.
We don't have any merch to send you, but we'll shout you out in our next podcast. How about that?
If you guys want merch, we can maybe start.
We can figure something out.
We could talk to Pat, maybe.
Yeah, we can figure out some merch. And then also stay on the lookout for our Monday podcast. We're going to have a guest on the show. It's going to maybe be our opportunity to submit questions for the mailbag and have a guest on the show. We're going to be pretty excited about that. So keep our lookout for Monday's show as well. But until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.